There is a moment in life that almost everyone experiences, but very few people talk about. It's the moment when everything feels like it has quietly collapsed. No dramatic explosion. No warning sirens, just a slow realization that things are not working the way you thought they would. For him, it happened on an ordinary night. No one else noticed anything unusual. The world outside kept moving. Cars drove past. People laughed, somewhere in the distance. Phones kept buzzing with notifications that had nothing to do with him. But inside his small room, something heavy settled into the silence. He was broke. The kind of broke that makes every small decision feel stressful. The kind where you check your account balance before doing the simplest things. The kind where even buying a cup of coffee feels like a risk. And it wasn't just the money. He had been rejected too many times to count. Opportunities that seemed promising had quietly disappeared. Messages that once felt hopeful turned into silence. Doors that he knocked on never opened. At first, he tried to stay positive. That's what people say to do, right? Stay positive. Keep smiling. Keep believing. But after a while, those words start to feel empty, because positivity doesn't always survive reality. What hurts more than failure is the way people start looking at you when you're struggling. At first, they are supportive. They say things like, "You'll figure it out," or "This is just temporary." But over time, something changes. Their tone becomes softer, but their expectations become smaller. Their encouragement slowly turns into distance. They stop asking about your plans. They stop checking in, and eventually, they stop believing. Not always out loud. Sometimes it's in the silence between conversations. Sometimes it's in the way they change the subject when your name comes up. Sometimes it's in the subtle assumption that you're not going anywhere. They start to move on with their lives, and you feel like you're standing still. That night, he felt the full weight of it. The loneliness, the rejection, the quiet embarrassment of not being where he thought he would be. It's a strange feeling when your life doesn't match the image you once had in your head. You remember the plans you made years ago, the confidence you had, the certainty that things would work out if you just kept trying. But reality doesn't always move according to effort. Sometimes you try hard and things still fall apart. Sometimes you give everything and still feel invisible. And when that happens, the noise in your mind gets loud. Questions start circling. Maybe they were right. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe this is just who I am. That voice is dangerous because it sounds logical. It doesn't scream, it whispers. And on that night, he sat there listening to it. No dramatic breakdown, no shouting, just a quiet man sitting with uncomfortable thoughts. But something unexpected happened in that silence. For the first time in a long time, he stopped trying to prove anything. He stopped replaying conversations in his head. He stopped imagining what he should say to the people who doubted him. He stopped defending himself in imaginary arguments. And when all of that mental noise faded, The room became incredibly quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, the kind that feels honest. Because in that moment, he realized something simple but powerful. The world had already decided a story about him. They believed he was finished. They believed the rejection defined him. They believed the struggle meant he wasn't capable. And maybe the most surprising realization of all was this: he didn't have the energy to argue with them anymore. For so long, he thought he needed to explain himself, to defend his choices, to convince people that he was still on the right path. But sitting there in that quiet room, something inside him shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small, steady awareness beginning to form. Maybe he didn't need to explain anything. Maybe the next chapter of his life wouldn't begin with a speech, an argument, or a moment of revenge. Maybe it would begin with something much quieter. Silence. At first, people were patient with him. When someone is struggling, there's usually a window of grace, a period where others are willing to believe that things will turn around. They offer encouragement, they listen to your plans, and they give you the benefit of the doubt. But that window doesn't stay open forever. Slowly, almost invisibly, the tone around him began to change. It wasn't always obvious. No one stood up and announced that they had stopped believing in him. It showed up in smaller ways. Conversations became shorter. The enthusiasm in their voices faded. Questions about his future turned into polite nods. And eventually, the silence from them started to say more than their words ever did. They began forming their own conclusions. Maybe he wasn't as capable as they once thought. Maybe his ideas were unrealistic. Maybe his struggle wasn't temporary after all. You can feel when people quietly adjust their expectations of you. It's not something they usually admit out loud, but you sense it in the way they speak, the way they look at you, the way they stop asking about the things you once cared about. They move on. They invest their attention in people who seem more stable, more predictable, more successful. And suddenly, you realize you are no longer the person they once rooted for. For a while, this realization bothered him deeply. There is something painful about feeling misunderstood, something frustrating about knowing your intentions, your effort, your vision, but watching others reduce your story to a simple conclusion. They failed. They couldn't make it. They tried, but it just didn't work out. And the instinct most people have in that moment is to fight back, to explain themselves, to defend their choices, to prove that everyone else is wrong. At first, he felt that same urge. There were moments when he wanted to send long messages explaining his situation. Moments when he imagined confronting the people who had quietly stepped away. Moments when he rehearsed speeches in his head, describing everything they didn't see. The effort, the long nights, the setbacks that never made it into conversation. But every time he imagined those explanations, something strange happened. The more he thought about it, the more exhausted he felt, because deep down, he realized something uncomfortable. Explanations rarely change people's minds. When someone has already decided who you are, your words often become background noise. They listen politely, but the story in their head stays the same. And trying to force them to see you differently can become a never-ending battle. So gradually, he stopped trying. Not in a dramatic way. He didn't make an announcement. He didn't post a message about it. He didn't confront anyone. He simply began to respond less. When they questioned his decisions, he didn't argue. When they hinted that he should give up, he didn't defend himself. When they made quiet assumptions about his future, he didn't rush to correct them. At first, this felt uncomfortable. There is a powerful human instinct to explain ourselves. We want to be understood. We want people to see our intentions and our effort. Silence can feel like surrender. But over time, he began noticing something unexpected. The less he explained, the calmer he felt. Without constant arguments, his mind became quieter. Without trying to convince anyone, he had more energy for his own thoughts. Without defending himself, he no longer felt trapped in other people's expectations. And slowly, he started to see something that had been hidden before. They were waiting for a reaction. They expected frustration. They expected desperation. They expected him to fight for their approval. But when that reaction never came, something shifted. The conversations became shorter. The pressure faded. And the strange thing about silence is that it creates space. Space to observe. Space to think. Space to step outside the noise of other people's opinions. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't performing for anyone. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He wasn't trying to prove that he deserved belief. Instead, he started paying attention to something much more important: his own direction. Because once you stop spending energy explaining your life to people who have already decided your story, something surprising happens. You begin to realize that their belief was never the thing that would change your future. And maybe, just maybe, the most powerful move in that moment isn't convincing them. It's letting them believe whatever they want. While you quietly continue forward, at some point, he began to notice something about reactions. Most of the time, reactions are not really choices. They are impulses. Someone says something dismissive, and your mind immediately wants to defend itself. Someone questions your decisions, and you feel the urge to explain. Someone underestimates you, and a quiet anger rises inside your chest. For years, he had responded the same way most people do. He reacted. He explained his plans. He tried to correct misunderstandings. He tried to prove that the doubts around him were wrong. But the strange thing about reacting is that it rarely creates clarity. In fact, it usually creates more noise. Every explanation leads to another question. Every defense leads to another judgment. Every emotional response becomes something for others to analyze. And before you realize it, your life starts revolving around other people's opinions. He began to see that pattern clearly. Every time they doubted him, he felt the pressure to respond. Every time they misunderstood him, he felt responsible for fixing their perception. But slowly, something changed in the way he approached these moments. Instead of reacting immediately, he started pausing. At first, the pauses were small, just a few seconds of holding his words back. Just a moment where he noticed the emotion rising inside him before letting it take control. And in those pauses, he discovered something powerful. Most reactions are temporary waves. They feel intense for a moment, but if you don't immediately act on them, they start to settle. The frustration fades. The urge to argue softens. The need to explain becomes less urgent. And when those emotions calm down, something else becomes possible: clarity. He started realizing that reacting was not actually helping him. In many ways, it was draining him. Every argument stole energy from his focus. Every emotional response kept him connected to the very voices he was trying to rise above. So he began practicing something that felt uncomfortable at first. He chose not to react. When someone made a dismissive comment, he listened quietly. When someone assumed he would fail, he let the words pass without correction. When someone questioned his direction, he didn't rush to justify it. This didn't mean he agreed with them. It didn't mean their opinions were correct. It simply meant he was no longer willing to spend his emotional energy fighting every misunderstanding. And that shift required discipline, because silence in those moments can feel strange. It goes against the instinct to defend yourself. It challenges the habit of seeking validation. But over time, he noticed something interesting. The less he reacted, the less control others seemed to have over his emotional state. Their words still existed, but they no longer dictated his mood. Their doubts still floated around him, but they no longer felt like commands he had to respond to. Without realizing it, he was building something stronger than confidence. He was building emotional discipline. Emotional discipline is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need attention. It simply shows up in moments where most people lose control. When someone provokes you, emotional discipline chooses calm. When someone misunderstands you, emotional discipline allows space. When someone doubts you, emotional discipline continues moving forward without needing approval. And this kind of discipline changes the dynamic between you and the world. Because when people expect a reaction and they don't get one, the entire pattern breaks. They may push a little harder at first. They may test the silence. They may repeat their opinions, waiting for a response. But eventually, something becomes clear. You are no longer playing the same game. Your calm becomes your answer. Your focus becomes your response. Your consistency becomes your message. And the surprising part is that this kind of silence doesn't make you weaker in their eyes. In many cases, it does the opposite, because people can sense when someone is emotionally stable. I can feel when their words are no longer creating the reactions they expected. That kind of calm presence carries a quiet authority. It signals that you are not easily shaken, not easily distracted, not easily pulled into unnecessary battles. He began to understand that power doesn't always look loud. It doesn't always look like winning arguments or proving others wrong. Sometimes power looks like restraint. Sometimes power looks like patience. Sometimes power looks like a person who no longer needs to react to every opinion that enters the room. And as he practiced that discipline day after day, something inside him became stronger. Not louder. Stronger. Because when you stop reacting to every external voice, you finally create enough silence to hear your own.